Well, this is our mandate, so we need to look at all details of the numbers as possible. But we made a significant progress. We brought inflation from 10.6 to close to 2 in less than 1 year and a half, and that's a big success. The ECB did its part, but it's not only on the ECB. We have the European labor market performing better than ever, more mobile, lots of flexibility, an increased labor market. Governments in Europe also did their part. We did not have the fiscal expansion that occurred, for example, in the US. So I think we collectively in Europe did a great job. That brought a cost to us, and we can never forget about it. We don't grow for 1 year and a half already. Investment has not grown for 2 years, 2023 and 2024. So this is a big cost. Credit to GDP ratio is at the lowest levels in record for the euro area. This is a cost that we have to consider in our analysis. Inflation is at 2%. It will over a little bit, up and down. This is the typical time series of inflation, if I may put it like that. We need to continue looking at the data, but we must be sure that we did a great
The
job.
dour picture you've just painted on the economy does raise the question, should you have already cut in April? Should you have already cut this month when it comes to interest rates?
Well, we need to consider all the old data. We have been talking a lot about wages as well, but wage growth has been coming down quite significantly in the euro area. The numbers we have for 2024 are in the range of 3 to 4%. After a 7 percentage point reduction in real wages, this is a number that I consider it's compatible with the continuation of the disinflation process. That's where we stand right now. We need to look at the numbers for the euro area. June is going to be a very important decision. Markets' expectations are very clear for that month. We continue to be data dependent. We will have data for April and May already, and I'm sure that we will deliver the response that is consistent with the recovery of the euro area economy that we have in our forecast.
It's unusual to see wage growth, labour market growth, when growth over the economy is fading. That's an unusual dynamic, right? When it comes to the United States, we know that immigration has come into the mix, the dynamics are different here. What do you put the strength in the labour market in Europe down to still?
You know, today's labor market in Europe is much more similar to the US than it used to be for decades. We also have a huge migration flow to Europe that is increasing our labor supply, that is helping our adjustment in these very difficult moments. We also have an upskill of the labor force in Europe in recent years, which is significant in the future to productivity growth. So the labor market today in Europe is not as sclerotic as it used to be. We have to change the lenses with which we look at the labor market in Europe. We have been creating a number of jobs that exceeds the pre-COVID numbers for close to 1/3. We are with very low unemployment duration these days in Europe. 50% of the employment gain is made of migrants, people that was not born in the country in which they are working. This is really amazing for Europe these days.
I want to move on to oil because over the weekend we saw the events around Israel, the direct attack by Iran, unusual turn of events. What does that mean if we do see escalation around the Middle East conflict? Could there be another spike in oil and shipping costs that derails the ECB? Is that something you're mindful of?
We have to follow all data, but it's a very large set of numbers. Of course, if a shock occurs of a magnitude that can question this disinflationary process, we have to take it on board. We haven't seen any such shock lately. But believe me, in my view, the strength of the disinflation process is strong enough to cope with these sort of shocks that we are kind of wondering if they will come or not.
So all going well, if it's a smooth execution from here, what's the playbook in your view for the ECB? What sort of rate cuts do we get? One in June, and then what sort of follow-up are you anticipating?
On that I am very strict, and I think we need to look at the data and take all data on board. But surely we achieved numbers for inflation that are, in my opinion, as close to 2% as we ideally would get. There's the risk of all this process becoming kind of an austerity flavor because at some point policy may become procyclical. That's the risk and the error that we in Europe have done lately with austerity policies. We need to keep short of that. We have the Stability and Growth Pact that is going to be enacted again. That will bring fiscal policy under an umbrella that is much welcome. So Europe played so far a stability role in the world, both in terms of monetary policy and of fiscal policy. We need to continue doing that. And that means, in my opinion, changing the cycle of monetary policy. So yes, we need to look ahead and month by month, meeting by meeting, decide on the path for interest rates. But it's about time to change this monetary policy cycle.
The market is looking at the potential for 4 rate cuts this year. Would you say that is even feasible at this point?
Well, I don't want to comment on markets, perspectives, or the future. This is going to be meeting by meeting. All ingredients are there. Bear shocks that we don't see today and we don't have today. That process should continue to also give some stimulus to investment in the euro area. An economy the size of the euro area will not grow, will not increase productivity with zero growth on investment. That's not going to happen. The labor market dividend, which was huge during all this process, with increased labor supply, with firms accommodating in their margins, also shocks that they suffered. That dividend is about to expire, I will say, and we need to find different sources for stimulus for the euro area, and I'm sure monetary policy on its capacity, which is limited but still exists, can provide that.
I want to bring up monetary policy over at the Fed because the comments from Jerome Powell yesterday that the data is not coming down as quickly as they would like and it may have an impact on the timing of rate cuts. What does that mean as we talk about policy divergence? We've had policy divergence over the years, but does that impact the size of the cuts in 2024 if the Fed doesn't move?
Well, let's face it, we had the more coordinated monetary policy cycle ever in the upswing of inflation. That was great. That generated externalities in our policy decisions. We took benefit of that. That was really amazing as central bankers being able to coordinate ourselves. If a decoupling exists, and there are clear signs of decoupling, the US is growing much more than Europe. Inflation is coming down slower in the US than Europe. The fiscal budget in expansion in the US has been much stronger than in Europe. The labor market in the US generated second round effects and pressure on wages that did not exist in Europe. This is already enough evidence of a sort of a decoupling. So it's not only on geological terms that Europe and the US decoupled already millions of years ago. If we have to go to fulfill our mandate first than the US, we have to do it because that's our mandate, to control inflation in Europe, to bring it down to 2%. If we have been more successful at doing that, it's because our sacrifice ratio has also been larger than the one in the US. We are not growing. We have credit that is at the lowest levels ever in the euro area, period. So we need to move. If that is the case, the ECB must be ready to act.
It seems as though we've already had multiple dress rehearsals as to what could happen on the currency front. The US dollar strength is there. We have seen in the last 24, 48 hours the impact on a lot of emerging market currencies, but it's also impacted developed market currencies. US dollar strength, how does that undermine the euro and price stability if we continue to see it?
We don't target exchange rates. That's the market result, and we cannot deal with our monetary policy looking at exchange rates. Of course, having said that, we work always in a sort of general equilibrium in a global world. Most things are connected. Global trade is recovering, most of it because of China, but an increase in the participation of China in global trade is deflationary by nature because China competes on prices. So we need to take everything on board and equilibrium of the exchange rate will be defined in the market, and our monetary policy will target inflation and only inflation.
If other central banks and finance ministries start to target currency intervention, and we are hearing more of that, are there consequences because you don't target the currency?
Well, we need to continue with our framework, and the framework is clearly that. Of course, the exchange rate is an equilibrium concept. If the economies diverge, if one economy becomes more competitive than the other, then this will have an impact on the exchange rate. Prices will adjust further down. Most shocks that we can think of for the euro area today and risks that we assess are deflationary in nature. Our buffers that existed at the beginning of the inflationary period are mostly gone. They are exhausted. Liquidity is below the levels that we had before. Household savings, the same thing. Again, the labor market dividend is probably exhausted, and we don't have more to gain from the labor market. So we live today in a situation that leaves us much more exposed to shocks than before. And most of those shocks will be deflationary and negative to output. That's very tricky, and we need to understand what can be the role of monetary policy in such a situation, because if the economy decelerates. Remember that we are at the peak of the business cycle for already a long time. We have been expanding this business cycle a lot, as it never happened before. But business cycles continue to be as they used to be. There are upswings, there are downswings.
Exactly.
If we change the situation in the business cycle and it becomes negative, because right now we are not growing, but this can become negative. It's not in our baseline,
right,
but that's a possibility. Then all other variables, including prices, of course, will have to adjust. And that's deflationary, and that will bring inflation below 2%, which was our nightmare for 8 years and a half. Average inflation before COVID in the euro area stood at 0.9%. That's not 2%. That was not our target. We must be aware of that.